We have our instance geometry, which is made up from a paint effects grass stroke. We have some near grass and some far grass. We're going to select our grass and duplicate it because making proxies deletes your original geometry. Then we're going to hide our original geometry and select our copied geometry. And we want to zero it on the center so it doesn't go off kilter when we instance it. Then we're going to take our grass and select the mesh. We're going to go up to Create and Vray and Create Proxy. Then we want to select our destination folder. I have a folder prepared called Proxy. And we're going to change the name to Grass1. Then we want to check override existing mesh and the last selection as a preview, which I forgot to do. So we're going to make an instance mesh. We're going to make a circle that's about the same size as the geometry we're instancing. Then we're going to select it and add a new shader. We're just going to use a Lambert shader. Vray will render a Lambert. And we want to change the color to just one of the primary colors. Then I'm going to create a square also about the same size as our instanced mesh. Because our paint effects grass probably has about 2,000 polygons, but this instance geometry only has about 6 polygons. We're going to assign a Lambert to it and again make it a primary color. So now we want to select the geometry for our proxy and then our instance geometry. Last, we're going to control click it. Then we'll go to Create, down to Vray and make proxy. We're going to change the name to Grass1. And overwrite the existing mesh and use the last selected mesh as a preview. And we're just going to leave everything else at default and create proxy. And as you can see, it deleted our geometry and left us with this new geometry. It seems to have dumped the shader. We're going to go through the same process again for our grass 2, selecting the mesh first, then selecting the instance geometry, changing the name to grass 2 this time. As you notice at the top, we have export selected as a single file. Otherwise, it will export 3 different proxies for our 3 different pieces of mesh. We're going to create proxy. It deletes it once again and leaves us with this new mesh. We're going to close that out. Go back to our original geometry and select it. I'm going to open up the hypershade. I have mine pinned to the taskbar here. And we're going to map the shaders for this original geometry. And if we'll notice, this first shader is called Vray Material 1. This is going to become important later. See, I didn't rename my shader, so the first grass shader is called Vray Material number 1. It's probably easier to see if I just map one of these grass meshes instead of all 3 of them. It's kind of confusing. So we'll just select the long grass and map it. And you see that we have Vray Material 1, which is the long grass shader. And I have a file attached to the color, which is just some grass. We're going to go over and talk about shaders for a second from DJX blog. This is just a simple paint effects stroke. We're going to open up the visor under Windows, General Editors, and Visor. Scroll down until we find trees. We're going to open up trees mesh and select the oak heavy. And just do our paint effects stroke. There's nothing special about this tree whatsoever. It comes with Maya. There's where the tree came from. So we'll delete that. Originally, I had made a paint effect stroke and then copied it and converted it to polygons. Now we have our polygon tree. We're going to select the leaves. And if we zoom in, then you can see that the leaves look kind of funny. There's like no stems on them and they're really small. And so we're going to select faces and we're just going to select one leaf so that we can look at the UVs. I'm pressing Shift Angle to increase my selection. We're going to open up the UV texture editor, which can be found under the Windows tab. It's about halfway down. That's where that comes from. I just pinned it to my taskbar. And we notice that our UVs cover the entire graph 1 square. So we're going to select our leaves and open the hypershade and graph them. And we want to go to Windows, Rendering Editors. That's where the hypershade is. I just have it pinned to the taskbar. And if we take a look at my leaf shader, it's a file. I just downloaded it off of Google. It's a really simple leaf. And in the texture, I increased the repeat UVs to 3 and 3. So it duplicates this leaf picture 3 times for nine different leaves. So if we go to our leaves and frame our selection, and we go to DJX blog and we download this Python script, it will take our UVs and separate them into groups of 9 so we can spread them across the UV map. And this is what it looks like when you open it up. We're going to select our leaves first and then hit the button. When you have a heavy tree like this, it might lag for a second, but it will do all of them. And it splits the leaves up into 9 different sections. So if we go back and we select our leaves, we can instantly see that there's something different about them. We find our one leaf and go to Faces and select the single leaf by pressing Shift and the arrow key. Then we'll open up our UV texture editor, and we can see that now it has separated the UVs among the leaves into the 9 different sections on the UV Graph 1 map. So if we go to our channel box, we can see that there is no history on the mesh. So we're going to select the UVs for all the leaves, move them a little bit, and then move them back into the number 1 graph. And you'll notice that it has created a poly tweak node in our channel box. That way, so when we close the file and open it up, it will save this transition of separating our leaves into 9 different sections. So this will become a little bit more apparent here in a second. I'm going to create a simple plane and lift it up a little bit so it gives it some shadow. And we're going to go to our hypershade, or the UV texture editor, make sure we have full coverage of the number 1 graph. Then we'll assign our leaf shader to it. And F to frame it. Get a nice view here. Then I'm going to turn on my dome light and my ground plane so we can get a shadow off of it. Next, I'm going to the Render tab, going down and opening up the options for the Vray RT. We want to turn on subdivisions and displacements. I'm checking the CPU because I'm on my laptop. We're going to turn off global illumination and render on the local machine and not the network, or it will crash. Then we'll go to Render and turn on our Vray RT. And it's lagging because I'm on my laptop. It has a 1 gigabyte video card. It shouldn't even be able to do this. And it looks like we're picking up some shadow from the tree, so I'm going to turn the tree off. And now you can see that our one leaf picture we downloaded off Google has 9 different variations. And that's because I have this other file mapped into the color gain, and I just made this in Photoshop. I split my picture up into 9 squares and picked 9 different colors that were kind of natural looking, some browns and some greens, and it changes the variation of the color on the leaf. If this doesn't work out for you, you can again check the color gain and change the color right on your color swatch. So you can see I'm making a little bit darker green if I don't like the look of my leaves. Or I can change it to something brown. Maybe I want to make dead leaves. So I can just play around with the color on the color gain and get a great variety of different colors for this leaf. Because if you use a single color on your leaves, then they just look really dumb and robotic, and it doesn't look like a tree at all. So back to our proxies. Now that we've explained the shader we're using, this is in fact the Vray Material 1 shader. It's just the generic name. I didn't change the name. And we built a specularity map, and I have that mapped into the reflection glossiness. Then I have a normal map, and that is mapped into the bump map. And then I have a height map, which is bumped into the bump height. And all of these were derived from the original image that I got off Google. I plugged them into Quixel's Endo 2 and made these different maps for them. Maybe we'll show how to do that on a different day. So the Vray Material 1 is the same material which is on our grass. We're going to go to Vray and import proxy. And we'll navigate to our proxy folder and import the proxies we just made with the grass. And we can see there we have our instance geometry. And if we go to our materials, we can see that they're all listed under our shaders. If we go to Hypershade, and we're going to map the materials for our original grass. They are Vray Materials 1, 2, and 3. We verified that they in fact do match the materials from our instance proxy geometry. So my computer's starting to lag a little bit. It really didn't like to make this video. Looks like I was shooting at 4K, so we'll downsize to 640. Make sure the GI is off. We're on use local machine, and the render settings are good so it won't crash. We're going to select our Vray light dome. It just has a file attached to it. I made this in Photoshop too. It's basically just a black picture with a white dot on it. That's all it is. And it's set to about a multiplier of 30. That's my HDR light. Gives really nice soft shadows. We can notice that our proxy geometry dumped the shaders. Even though it lists them and they match the shaders that we have in the Hypershade, it has dumped them. So we're going to select the shaders from our original grass and map them. And we're going to select our proxy object. Make sure that we have Vray Material 1. We're going to middle mouse drag our Vray Material 1 and drop it onto the material, and then select 2 and middle mouse drag 2 and drop it on the input, and again the same with 3. Reassigning our shaders to our proxy object. And now when we do another render, we can see that it does in fact pick up our colors. I'm going to use the render region so we don't have to render the whole scene again. And there's the colors on our proxy object. So we're going to open up our main scene now. Which is the paint effects oak tree that I just showed you. So we have our paint effects oak tree. And I'm going to turn off the light dome so that we can see what we're doing. My nice HDR lighting. And we just have the one paint effects tree and a plane with a little bit of sculpted elevation on it. Then we have our camera view saved. So we can do multiple renders without worrying about our camera moving. And there's 3 different particles being emitted off of the mesh and 3 different instancers for each particle. So we're going to import the grass we were just working on. We'll navigate to the grass file we were just at, grass Vray, and import it. And we're going to delete the ground plane and the light because we don't need those in this scene. And we're also going to delete the original paint effect stroke because we don't need that either. We also have these proxy instance geometry here. I'm going to hide the tree so you can see them. And they're just 4 different shapes with 4 different colors on them so we can see our different geometries in our scene without having to render them. We got a circle, a triangle, a square, and a tube. Now you notice that when we imported our scene, we also got the scene name with it. It says grass Vray 1 semicolon. So we're going to copy that, go to, first we want to select all the geometry we just imported. We're going to go to modify, prefix hierarchy names. We're going to paste the scene name and press OK, and it will delete all of the scene names from our hierarchy. Then we're going to hide the geometry and turn our tree back on, going back to our basic view. Basically, we just imported the grass because we wanted to get the shaders in here. So if we look in Hypershade, we can see that we now have the shaders for our grass. But if we look at the shaders, we'll notice that the names have changed. Now they have the scene name, grass Vray 1, attached to the shader, and they're no longer Vray material 1. In this scene, however, if we look at Vray material 1, because I almost never rename my shaders, Vray material 1 is attached to the leaves. And so if we import our proxy geometry, it's going to look at the leaf shader, which is very nice, but it doesn't look good on the grass. So there's our leaf shader. It has the same name as the proxy object's grass shader. We're going to import our proxies. We'll go to Create, down to Vray, Import Proxy, navigate to our proxy folder, and import our proxies one at a time. You'll see it creates a mesh node down at the bottom, and it also shows up with our instance geometry on the scene. We'll import our 4 different grasses, the 2 variations of near grass and the 2 variations of far grass. We're going to open up Hypershade and get our shaders, and we want to update the shaders for our grass. So we'll go to Vray material 1, and we'll reassign the grass shader 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll go through this process again for the other two proxies, assigning each and every material again, which could be a painstaking process if you have a lot of proxies. Then we'll select our two first proxies and assign them to instancer 2, which is our near ground grass. We're going to put add to the instancer. Then we'll select our two far ground grasses and attach them to instancer 1, which is the instance for the far ground grass. Then we'll press play, and it will populate our particles. This actually took a while to do this. Like I said, I'm on my laptop, and it's only got 8 gigabytes of RAM, but it was still able to handle this scene. If I would have used actual geometry, this would have been several trillion polygons. But since I'm using instances and proxies, they're pretty much free. So if you press 6, you can see the basic layout of the different types of grass and the coverage that you have in your scene before you actually have to render it when you're using these instance geometries. Then we're going to open up our Vray frame buffer. Again, we're going to check our render settings to make sure it doesn't crash. Looks like I was rendering 8K last time. GI is turned off. Settings are we want to use the local machine and not the network. Transferring missing assets. And we're going to open up the Vray frame buffer, rendering our perspective kit. No, I'm not going to make you sit here while I render an 8K image on my laptop. We're going to go to the history. And load the 8K picture that I burned on the network, which apparently took 20 minutes. So we'll select it and press load. And it will open up in the Vray frame buffer. And this is what our scene looks like with its instanced geometry at about 8K. You can zoom up really close to the leaves and see the texture and the variation in color. And the same thing with the grass. It looks like we have pretty good coverage. And we'll go back to erase our instance geometry so it gets rid of the lag. This is the script that I used for the particles. It comes from the Genome School. And if we go to the particles, you input the script under the particle shape. There's a real nice course that goes all into how to do all of this. It's about 30 hours, costs a couple $1,000. Genome's a technical college. But you create an expression and you input your script into the expression for the particle, which gives you this nice variation on the grass instancing. My dome light and show the difference between making an invisible dome light as opposed to a visible dome light. We're going to load our 4K picture, and we'll notice that it has an alpha matte because the dome light is set to invisible, which is not the default set. You have to set it to invisible to get this alpha matte. If you leave it visible, which I'll show in a second, we're going to drop our resolution down to 320 by 240. Turn the light back to its defaults, and we'll show what happens when you just leave your dome light visible. That should probably be enough to show you. So you can see there is no alpha matte. If we go to our RGB, we can see that it's picked up the side of the hill, but if we go to our alpha matte, then the sky is covered up. So we want to make our dome light invisible, otherwise it will show up in our alpha matte. Then we're going to go down to our plane, which is emitting our particles, and we will go to the hypershade and graph the file that's attached to the plane emitting the particles. And you can see that it's just a paint effects map that is right on the plane, and it has a ramp attached to that would be the color offset. And I'm bumbling around here, trying to find, there it is. Under the emitter at the very bottom, you can check to emit from dark and use texture, and you take the paint effects file and you middle mouse drag it right onto the emitter. And you can see the variation here with the ramp between the near ground particles and the far ground particles. I've just reversed the ramp on the file on both of these pictures with the color offset. We're going to hide our light dome so I can show what this looks like. We're just going to emit a few thousand particles to show how this works. And if we select instancer 1, you can see that there's more particles in the background and less in the foreground. I'm going to select the top view and press A to frame all of it. You can see there's more particles in the background and less in the foreground. So we're using our grass with less geometry in the back, and it fades into the front. And then if we select the near ground grass, we can see that the more detailed grass is more heavily populated near the camera, and it fades out towards the rear at the end of the camera. So this can save us a few polygons in the long run. We also want to take our proxy mesh, and if you zoom in and you notice here, the proxy instance geometry is actually in the scene. So we want to hide that after we import it, or it will show up in our scene. Also, you keep seeing me use this camera view. The way that works is you find a nice place that you want your camera to shoot from, and then you left click on the camera view button, and then you right click to select your views. So I can select view 2, which has a nice view of the geometry, or we can select view 3, which I just made. And that's how you set your camera views.